Now, okay, you have it on the table, set there. That's it. Yes. Good.
Yeah, it's gonna be outside and.
Show up.
You guys mind? Yes, Mr. Walken.
I'll now call this meeting to order. Can we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alcorn. Ms. Bagley.
Present.
Ms. Bailey. Mr. Banks.
Present.
Ms. Bomke. Ms. Bomke. Ms. Franklin.
Present.
Ms. Gary. Ms. Garvey.
Present.
Ms. Hayes.
Here.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Ms. Lawson. Mr. McLaughlin.
Here.
Mr. Smith. Mr. Stark.
Here.
and Mr. Walkinshaw.
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Ms. Bonke and Ms. Garvey have requested to participate in the meeting remotely. Ms. Bonke needs to participate remotely due to being out of the area. Ms. Garvey due to a medical reason. I need a motion and a second to allow both Ms. Bonke and Ms. Garvey to participate electronically.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? I'll now turn it over to Rich for our safety moment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, by show of hands, particularly with staff, qualified AED, CPR. Okay, great. So the first thing, we'll do a couple of assignments here. So in the event that we need to contact first responders, we'll have Sarah in the back. If you could be the primary 911. If Virginia next to you could be the backup. If we need AED, CPR, we do have AED device next to the elevator. It has oxygen in it, then there's a first aid kit out there. So if I get a primary, John will be primary, and let's see, Tim back there will be backup. So we've got that covered. But once again, if we need to evacuate this space, our primary evacuation route will be through the double wood doors to the elevators. We won't take the elevator. We'll take the stairwell to the right, go down a flight of stairs, and we'll exit out the front of the building. In the event that, and also I'm going to ask for just somebody designated to go down and contact the security and folks like that. So Joe back there in the back. So great. And then finally, when it comes to active shooter, we're going to run, hide, or fight. Hopefully the last part of that we will not do. So any questions? That's my safety briefing, Madam Chair.
Okay, we'll now move into agenda item number 4, approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any amendments to the agenda? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Walkinshaw, seconded by
Hayes.
Ms. Hayes. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
We'll now move into item 5, approval of the minutes from the April 22nd VRE Operations Board meeting. Does anyone have any corrections or amendments to the minutes? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Hayes, seconded by Mr. Alcorn. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll now move into item 6, Chair's comments. Welcome. I just want to give a quick reminder that we are live streaming the meeting and there are mics throughout the room. So please keep side conversations to a minimum and speak as loudly as you can so that our remote participants can hear. There will be a bylaws committee meeting following this meeting. All operations board members are welcome to attend. Following the June operations board meeting, there will be a meeting of the finance committee. Looking 2 months ahead, we are planning a reception following the July 15th operation board meeting to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the start of VRE service. We will have a lunch and several guest speakers. Please mark that down on your calendars and plan to attend. Now I will turn it over to Mr. Dalton for his report, item 7.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jumping right to the safety report. A couple of things to report here. As depicted on the screen to the left, that's just a cover shot of a plan. On May 2nd, 2022, the Federal Railroad Administration formally approved the new VRE System Safety Program Plan, or the SSP plan. There's a lot to this plan, but the overarching purpose is it describes our system-wide processes where hazards and risks associated with our operations are proactively identified, analyzed so that preventive actions can be implemented to eliminate, control, and minimize their impacts. The SSP plan clearly defines organizational safety policies and procedures that can be measured, audited, and evaluated to promote a culture of continuous improvement. I will say that VRE has had a system safety plan for about 2 decades, okay? And over time, it has just, the program plan has matured. We've taken best practices, lessons learned, and incorporated that in our system safety plan. Most recently, within the last couple of years, the Federal Railroad Administration then came out with some standard regulations, if you will. So basically, all railroads operating under FRA would be at least doing similar things. So hence the reason to submit this new revised plan to the FRA, and they approved that. So just wanted to make that announcement. And then on the right side of the slide, I just wanted to note that the Keolis management team, which is our contract operator, they're implementing what is considered in the railroad industry a pretty innovative new system called Comply 365. And this is similar to in the aviation industry. Essentially what this does is currently our train crews, very unique to VRE, our operating train crews, they have to operate and be certified qualified out of 5 rule books. Generally speaking, when you're in your railroad career, you would only maybe 2 rule books, but because of where we operate and multiple host railroads, they have to do 5. So, and then they actually have to carry these rule books with them. They have to have them present all the time. So essentially this Comply 365 program will digitize this for them and provide the opportunity to update material in a very timely fashion. So again, the aviation industry has been doing this for a while, and now we'll be doing it on behalf of Keolis. So on-time performance for the month of April. System-wide on-time performance, still good, still above our goal of 90%. Monthly ridership continues to slowly increase. Total of 91,682 compared to March. April had 2 fewer service days in it, so we still continue to trend upward. I think really the telling story for April is the increase in average daily ridership, which typically normalizes that out. We are month to date through May, albeit we have seen some plateauing of some ridership, partly because of the work going on the Manassas line. But we're trending in that 4,800, 4,850 range right now. So we continue to trend up. Let me just say on here is, as I presented to you last month, we did do a temporary schedule change to be able to accommodate a massive amount of track and surface work on the Manassas line. I had reported to you that in order to mitigate performance issues, I will tell you that even though, I mean, we're operating trains over there, and obviously we want to minimize delay minutes, but essentially every train that's been operating on the Manassas line has been late. And you know, it started off probably it peaked last week in that 15, maybe 15 to 18 minute average. That's been driven down. But the trains are late, and all for the right reasons. There's a lot of work going on over there, and it's to protect the workers, it's to protect the equipment, and keep our service operating. The good news is I did tell you that that it was predicted for the work to take 3 weeks. The work started middle of the first week of May. And as reported to me this morning, I've been in constant contact with them every day. They do anticipate to clear up early to mid next week, so that'll be right at the 3-week mark. I would like to just continue to operate the temporary schedule, finish the week out, and then come back the Tuesday after Memorial Day with our normal schedule. And then that will coincide also with the implementation of our seasonal schedule or summer schedule on the Fredericksburg line. So by doing that, that gives the Norfolk Southern a couple extra days if they need it to get things cleared up and cleaned up. So that's likely what the messaging will be out to our passengers this afternoon to give them time to plan. So just wanted to cover that while we were there, or while I was there. Moving on. Going back to the March meeting, our Ridership Recovery team provided a very extensive presentation to you on many different elements of our return of ridership campaigns, both from the marketing perspective, the community collaboration perspective and stuff. And I'll give a little update on the community efforts. But one thing I did want to come back and capture is a program that we started in January of this year. And this is basically internal to VRE, internal to our contracted service providers. And it's what we've affectionately referred to as S-cubed or S3. And if you look at the boards up here, I'll walk you through real quick what the 3 S's are. In terms of maintaining a high level of service reliability, of course, safety is paramount. So we are, and this is a mindset, this is part of our decision making, that we're always going to work safe. And then we're going to think smart. I'll give you an example that we've used in terms of thinking smart. Well, I'll relate it. I'll stay out of the railroad for a second, and I'll relate it to something we all can do. What we're emphasizing, and again, it's not that we just started doing this. This is just a way to emphasize things. But for example, if you, let's just say that you have a slow leak in your tire on your car, and you've got it figured out that, hey, I can top that tire off with air and I can make it another day, right? So you've got that until you can go get that tire repaired. We're emphasizing, don't add any air to that tire. Go fix the tire. Go replace the tire. If you have to take the equipment out of service, go fix the tire. Don't even hesitate. For us, when we're certifying equipment in the middle of the night, we go through checklists, and it may be the checklists work out, but if a technician hears something that doesn't sound right or just doesn't feel comfortable with it, cut the car. cut the car out, put a different car in there. Let's think smart. And then finally, just stay sharp. And this isn't just your physical appearance. This is a mindset. Stay sharp in your mindset. And frankly, there are days, and I don't think anybody in the room is exempt for this. There's just days where you just maybe you don't feel sharp. Okay, let us know that. We'll find something else for you to do. We'll work with you on that. In other words, let's just have that dialogue. Let's just have that communication, because at the end of the day, we can do all the work that we're doing in terms of promoting VRE service and getting people on our trains. But if we cannot maintain a high level of service reliability, we'll never keep them. Okay. So I just wanted to let you know there is in front of you to each of your stations, there's a lapel pin there. And again, via the posters, we're doing a lot of this communication internally. So wanted to let you know that. Other elements of our ridership return, just wanted to go back and capture some of the community events. We've, of course, it started May 1st at the Great Train Race in Fredericksburg, and staff was out there. I know Supervisor Bonke stopped by. A good event. It gets us out in the community. We work and live in these communities, and we want to promote VRE in that positive light. The Fredericksburg Farmers Market last week. Thank you, Mr. Kelly, for stopping by. And then the Manassas Farmers Market on the same day. This was an opportunity for us and OmniRide to sort of pull our resources together and talk everything VRE. And if you can kind of make it out, right in the center of that photos, former operations board member Pam Sebeski, who's the chair of the TPB now. She stopped by and took a few seconds to have some photos with us. Today is the Bike to Work Day 2022, and we have staff out at various stations, including the Woodbridge station, and our chair graced us earlier this morning, and actually we're able to capture a picture of her and update this slide deck in time to present that. So staff is out there. I did want to say, follow up from last month when the operations board did approve us amending our tariff and basically formalizing our relaxed or relaxing our bike policy. I believe I reported in the month of March, we carried a total of 306 bicycles on board VRE trains. For the month of April, that went to 426, and we continue to see an uptick in that. So just wanted to promote Bike to Work Day, and we have staff, again, very collaborative effort out there getting that done. We continue to have business and community outreach events. Joe Sports and Karen are out there participating in those different events. And here are some upcoming events that we're going to participate on. But I do want to draw your attention to the one on the right, in the right box. On June 4th, once again, after about a 2-year pause, VRE will be out operating trains for the Manassas Rail Festival. Very good event. It goes from 10 to 3. We'll be operating excursion trains about on the hour, and just really happy to be back at this event. This is something VRE has done, with the exception of the last couple of years. I think we're going on, this is probably about the 25th or 26th time in our 30-year career that we've done that. So just wanted to let you know that. And then finally, I do have, just real quick, I do have some staff members that I have not introduced to you before. Some of them are new, some of them have been here for a bit, but because of COVID, wasn't able to introduce them to you. So let me do that first. Danilo Ruiz, if you'd stand up, Danilo. Danilo joined us at the beginning of the month as our enterprise system administrator. Lives in the Herndon area, and glad to have Danilo on board. So welcome, Danilo.
Good honor to be here. Thank you.
Tim Thomason in the back there, our manager of warehouse and inventory control. He's one that's been here, I think, about a year or so. And Tim is, again, our manager of warehouse and inventory control in the at our Crossroads facility in Spotsylvania County. Virginia Martin is a mechanical ops assistant. She actually was, she worked for us on a temporary basis, and then we had a full-time position that had opened up and convinced Virginia to come work for us full-time. So glad to have Virginia. And then in the back, Sarah Higgins, who's our Director of Mechanical Operations, has been with VRE in one capacity or the other almost as long as I have been. And so last year, or excuse me, about February of 21, Sarah was the previous manager of warehouse and inventory control. She graciously accepted the position of mechanical director of the mechanical operations based on her years of experience, technical expertise, and frankly, her leadership. So just wanted to recognize Sarah. I will say Sarah and her team, it was one of those functional areas during COVID. They did not have an opportunity to work remotely. They have been out there day in and day out and just done a great job for us. So thanks. A little long-winded, but wanted to get a few things in there. So Madam Chair, I'll take any questions.
Sure, any question for Mr. Dalton, Mr. Alcorn?
Mr. Dalton, I do have to ask you this question just for confirmation. In terms of our certifications for our rail operators, everybody up to date?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Let me just say this. Because of our positive safety culture, we have processes in place that our safety culture would not prevent those processes from not being completed. So in terms of recertification, there's so many different layers to what we do. And again, a little bit of, with us, we're a little different because we come under the FRA. I'm very prideful of our positive safety culture. So in everybody, you see the staff back there, all of them is wearing an S3 pin. They walk out, every one of them has a reflective vest. And I mean, it's a very, very positive culture out there. And it's basically, it's a top down and a bottom up approach. So we're very proud of that. So that's another example or one of the examples of just our positive safety culture will not permit that.
Sir.
More of a comment than a question relating to Rich's ridership recovery. We and the Commonwealth also track Amtrak ridership, and we've seen some positive signs there. Actually, in 2 of our 4 state-supported routes, to Norfolk and Roanoke, we actually in April surpassed pre-pandemic levels. So my point is, people are coming back to the route. High gas prices may help, but it was going up steadily, 60, 70, 80, 90%. And for April, one announcer board meeting there, I guess I'm announcing here today too, that we've surpassed in those 2 routes ridership levels. And another route, we're at 92% of where we were in 2019. That's a good sign, I think, in the Commonwealth. Again, these state support routes go from Norfolk to Richmond to DC and up the Northeast Corridor, and similarly Roanoke, Alexandria, DC up the Northeast Corridor. So again, hopefully that we'll start seeing that on VRE soon, which I think will help the overall transportation network. We all know traffic's back. Taking up this morning from Richmond, especially the summertime traffic is definitely back, which compels people to realize, hey, there's another alternative. And that is real. Thanks.
Mr. Stewart?
I was just along similar lines as we're seeing increases in ridership. Do you all have any sense of projections or pretty much where you think we'll be, or do you think you see signs it's going to be higher or lower than? I know it's more anecdotal at this point, but I was just curious if you all have a feeling for that.
So let me just say this. I commute 3-4 times a week on VRE. I spend a lot of time interacting with our passengers. And I'll just say this somewhat of a general. Right now, we are in a pattern where a majority of, and this is both the federal agencies and even the private sector that's riding VRE, they're in this 1 maybe to 2 day in-person work schedule. And most of those, and a lot of them, describe them. They're very detailed, but they anticipate going, if they're at one, they anticipate going to 2 days here in another month, and then from 2 days to 3 days. This stretches out over months. Actually, I've heard some plans that actually just stretch out. Some agencies and even private sector people won't even be, aren't anticipated to be in their new normal, if you will, at 2 to 3 days a week until October or November of this year. So we're still trying to put some of that picture together, frankly. So that's what we have right now. It's really about just communicating with, with the people that are currently riding the system. And then even some that we've communicated with saying, trying to set up their benefits or doing some other interaction with them. Actually, at some of these events we had in Fredericksburg, I had several people coming back going, yeah, we'll be working fully remote until September, and then we'll start coming back. And these are previously regular VRE riders. So just a lot of that going on is what we're seeing.
Any other questions for Mr. Dalton? Thank you for that. We'll now move into item 8, public comment time. VRE accepts public comments both in person and electronically via the VRE website. Members of the public wishing to make public comments have 3 minutes and should state their full name and the jurisdiction they live in. And written comments submitted before 8 a.m. this morning will be forwarded to the members of the board, read into the minutes and attached to the official minutes. Do we have any members of the public here who would like to address the board? Madam Clerk, do we have any electronically submitted comments?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have 2. We have Mr. James Jones from Fairfax County comments. I would like to underscore the importance of communicating status updates with your customers, particularly in the early mornings when alternative commuting plans can still be made. Twitter is an ideal means to share these updates as close to real time as possible. There are frequent delays that extend past your 10-minute delay notice standard, for which notices are not made or made well past the time when they would have been helpful. And ensuring timely updates requires only good internal communication and desire to serve your customers. Classic low-hanging fruit. Mr. Jason Smith from Manassas writes, why did you wait to conduct the track work on the Manassas line until everyone was clear to return to work and would start using the VRE again? You had 2 years of pandemic to do necessary work when there were minimal riders. This stinks of poor planning and poor management. And Madam Chair, that concludes our electronic comments.
Sure. Can we get some thoughts on at least being able to share updates via social media?
We have a system basically that interfaces with social media and our own Train Talk alert system. So we basically put out information as it relates to delays and stuff like that, and then it populates all the different social media accounts, including our Train Talk system, and of course it includes Twitter as well. So we did see that comment. We were trying to go back because we don't know the date. We don't know. We're just trying to go back to see if there was a potential that any of those links were broken. If you go to our Twitter account right now, you'll see a lot of the messaging that we do, and it does make it to Twitter. So, but we're always keeping an eye on that, making sure that we just don't miss anything. So we take the comment. We're looking into it to see if there's anything that we can do from a improvement standpoint.
Sure. And then with regards to the second question about track work, any light you can shed on kind of timing and planning for that?
It just, I will just say, number one, the track's owned by Norfolk Southern and maintained by Norfolk Southern. Knowing how that management of track work across a large system like that, Norfolk Southern's maintaining about 21,000 miles of track. It's a system. These gangs travel throughout the systems, and I explained last month that once a certain territory reaches certain preventive maintenance limits in terms of the number of tonnage that's operated over that railroad, then of course it requires additional tonnage. That, again, and of course, Norfolk Southern's really good about communicating with us and working on mitigation plans. So the good thing is, come about Wednesday or Thursday of next week, they'll be out of the area, and we will end up with a near gold-plated railroad to operate off of for many years, so.
Chair,
Yes, sir.
I'm assuming we can get back to that individual and explain to them that your question is not something that we can deal with. It's a Norfolk Southern issue, not a VRE
Yeah,
issue.
yeah. And in layman's terms.
I have to get somebody else to do that.
But.
Point taken, absolutely.
Well noted.
I don't like when people have information that is not necessarily, I don't think it's a problem for us to say, we're really concerned, thank you for your concerns, but this is something we have no control over. It's Norfolk Southern decision and just, in fact, say, we'll pass the email on to Norfolk Southern. You can ask Norfolk Southern why they waited until.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Stewart,
it was addressed. Thank you.
Mr. Wilkinson.
Yeah, I think it's a great point by Mr. Kelly. I just want to, maybe we can do the same with Mr. Jones was the first comment.
Yes, but when they submit these comments, they don't input a return address.
That's the problem, or opportunity.
Well, can we put something in our updates to the ridership in the magazine, say, hey, we got these questions over the course of the month, and here's the answers to those questions. And then
Yes.
you can have somebody.
And I also wonder if maybe, so is it a form that people
Yes.
do? So maybe we
Update the
could
form.
consider making it an option for
Right,
people
fill
to
in
have
their
their contact information. For Mr. Jones, I hope I'm getting that right. For example, we could, if we had that email and say, got your comment, really appreciate that. Was there a specific day where you didn't get what you need? And then it might help you in tracking it down.
Yeah, I would second that. That's probably a good idea to in that form.
And I would also if we got train talk or whatever else, I think it shows that we really care and we're listening to the ridership. If we could post something, we got these questions and here's how we answer those.
Yes, sir.
Exactly, again, I think you said, how long is the truck work taking in the Manassas line?
So the total duration was 3 weeks. And so this upcoming Wednesday will be the 3-week mark.
Rich is too modest to say this, but I know, because I've been working Norfolk Southern a lot too. The original plan was longer, and we worked with Norfolk Southern to shorten that. So he's too modest to give himself credit for doing so.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we should say that.
Absolutely. Yep, so I think the takeaway is let's see if we can try and collect some additional information from our public comments. Okay, we will now move into item 9, our action items. We will start with A, to recommend authorization to execute an amendment for the second year of the first option period of the contract for maintenance services for Commuter Rail. Mr. Dalton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the Operations Board is asked to recommend to the commissions a contract amendment in the amount of $10,024,653 for the second year of the first option period. For the contract value, total amount not to exceed $58,926,279 through the June 30th of 2023. So this item, and then just like the next item, this one is a contract we have with Keolis for maintenance services. And this is like the second part of a 2-step process. As you recall, we went through the budget process that captured what the FY23 cost would be or budget would be. So now we're coming back around as we normally do this time each year. And this is a request to amend the contract, increase the value by the budgeted amount for the fiscal year 2023. There are no service additions, decreases. Everything's essentially the same as FY 2022. There will be a little bit more under the non-fixed part. There'll be some additional programs as part of our life cycle maintenance program that we have budgeted for. But there is obviously a large contract increase by the contract requirement or escalation requirements based on CPI of little over 6%. So that's my summary, Madam Chair.
Is there a motion?
Move approval of action item 9A.
Moved by Mr. Walkinshaw. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. Bagley. Any discussion? Mr. Walkinshaw.
This is a question for Rich. How many option years are there? I apologize if it's in here and I can't find it, but how many option years are there in the original contract?
So we had a base year of 5, and then there's 2 5-year options. So we're like the second year of that first 5-year option period.
Any other questions or discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, we will now move.
Someone's heart at keel was.
Now move into item 9B. Recommend authorization to execute an amendment for the third year of the second option period of the contract for operating services for commuter rail. Mr. Dalton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, the Operations Board is asked to recommend to the commissions to increase the total contract amount to the current contract by $17,797,500 for a total amount not to exceed $230,588,057. And again, this will be through the end of the fiscal year 2023. And this contract, of course, is for the certified locomotive engineers, certified conductors, management. They do manage our claim services. And to Mr. Walkinshaw's point before, this is the last option period on this contract. And so we will be having discussions within the next year, likely to recompete this contract. So that's my summary, Madam Chair.
Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Mr. Banks, seconded by Mr. Alcorn. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll now move into item 9C to recommend authorization of the issuance of sale of Transportation District Special Obligation Revenue Bonds, Series 2022. Turn over to Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll give everybody a chance to take a deep breath here. Because this one's going to be a little, I just want everybody to be able to absorb this. I'm going to give some opportunity for Mr. Schofield to get set up, but let me just introduce this item this way. Just wanted to kind of take a step back. Obviously, this action, or this recommendation to the commissions is part of a funding commitment the commission's made as part of transforming rail in Virginia. But I just want to go back and just capture for just a second, what is transforming rail in Virginia and what does this do for VRE? And just as a reminder, one of the objectives of this program was, and there's a lot of things going on here, so I'm just picking out sort of the top 5, top 6, but one of the things that this program does for us is permanence. What we were able to do through this collaboration was solidify operating access agreements on the Fredericksburg line with CSX and of course with the rail authority and these agreements are perpetual. So in other words, this gives VRE the opportunity to operate in perpetuity or until such time the commissions no longer operate a commuter rail service. And I want to bring that home a little bit because typically at this meeting every year, I'm coming to you asking or recommending authorization to extend our operating access agreement with CSX for 1 more year. And I do that every year. Guess what? Not doing that this year. We already have that in place. So just wanted to point that out. This also has provided a collaborative approach to service planning and system optimization for us as the operator, CSX, Amtrak, VRE, which again, we didn't have before. This gives us an opportunity to operate additional trains, which include weekend service and also some reverse flow opportunities. Ultimately, this program will also provide freight and passenger rail separation. In other words, and that's something that VRE is, experienced over its 30-year life of how on some days those two don't mix. I did want to point out too that this actually reduced our operating costs as well. Going back into the weeds a little bit, when we used to pay facility lease fees to CSX at the tune of about $200,000 a year. CSX prior to this agreement had come to us and said, we're recalculating how we're doing our lease agreements. And so expect an increase in the neighborhood of $5 to $7 million each year. So we were faced with that going into these negotiations as well. So once again, in perpetuity, we pay $1 for each location that we occupy for a total of about $20 a year. That will be, so again, a real cost reduction, operating cost reduction of about $200,000. And then just simply as part of the funding agreement, of course, there's a continued use requirements of the funding agreement. So in other words, whatever we contribute to in terms of funding, we get to use it and through the useful life of that asset. So again, just wanted to set it up that way. That's why we did Transforming Rail in Virginia, and that's why this item that's coming in front of you is an integral part of it and a very important part of that. So with no further ado, Mr. Schofield, you're good to go. You got a clicker and everything up there. So I'm just going to hand this over to Mr. Schofield. And I believe he'll start with an introduction of his team that's in the room. Mr. Schofield.
That's right. Thank you, Rich. Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. As Rich indicated, before I get into the presentation, I'd like to introduce the members of the team that we have here in the room today. They are here as a resource for you. If you have any specific questions that you want to ask, whether it's about how we've structured the transaction, about the legal documents, about how we're going to market the bonds, we have the right people here in the room to answer those questions. So first person is Joanne Carter from PFM. PFM is the financial advisor for VRE. Joanne has been guiding us through this transaction all the way from the beginning. Number two, we have Matt Bowen from B of A. B of A is the senior manager on the underwriting team. And so with their guidance on navigating the market, we will work to maximize the proceeds from this bond issuance. And then last but not least, we have Mike Graff from McGuire Woods, our bond counsel, and they are the guys that keep us out of trouble. In addition, we actually have Scott Colcorf here representing NBTC this morning. So I have the opportunity to recognize him for all the work that he has put into this transaction. This really has been a joint effort between VRE and NBTC, and in particular, Scott's knowledge of how the regional fuels tax works has been absolutely critical to making this work. So our request today is that the operations board recommend that NBTC authorize the issuance and the sale of the Transportation District Special Obligation Revenue Bonds, which we'll just call the bonds. And we are also asking you to recommend that PRTC authorize and consent to the issuance of those bonds by NBTC. So how did we get here? This has been a multi-year process, and I won't hit everything that we did along the way, but the big points here are in 2018, the General Assembly created the Commuter Rail Operating and Capital Fund, as we know it, the CROC Fund, to support all aspects of VRE commuter rail. The CROC Fund receives $15 million a year from motor fuels taxes collected in the NBTC and PRTC regions. And the statutory language for the CROC specifically allows that it can be used as the backing for a debt issuance. In December 2019, as Rich was just talking about, there was a landmark agreement that was announced by the Commonwealth that we now know as TRV. Once complete, this nearly $4 billion investment support a 75% increase in VRE's level of service, including off-peak, reverse, and weekend service, in addition to our usual peak period service. In March of 21, we entered into the funding agreement with DRPT, which was then assigned to VPRA. The funding agreement commits us to supporting TRV in two ways. One, to issue debt that's secured by a pledge of the CROC monies. And two, over a 10-year period, to provide the balance of the CROC money that we have to VPRA on a pay-as-you-go basis to support important capital investments within VRE's area of service. Then in the fall of 2021, commissions approved the updated debt management principles that are guiding this debt issuance, and then also authorized us as staff to advance the public bond issuance. And then last, earlier this year, all of your jurisdictions, the 9 VRE member jurisdictions, independently and unanimously gave their consent to the bond issuance as required by the master agreement. So, if you keep one thing in mind about this transaction, as we go through all of the details here, we have committed, it should be this, we have committed to a certain amount of annual debt service. We have not committed to providing a specific amount of dollars to VPRA. So even though the market may be volatile, even though we may not be sure exactly what the transaction is going to end up looking like, we know ahead of time how much we're going to have to pay each year in debt service. And I think that's important to keep in mind. But at the same time, in light of the market uncertainty, in light of the fact that we're still about a month away from actually trying to price the bonds, we do need to put parameters in place. So in approving these documents, we're saying that we will not go beyond the following maximums. So specifically, that the aggregate principal amount of the bonds will not exceed $140 million, that the true interest cost of the bonds will not exceed 6.5%, and that the maturity date of the bonds will not be later than December 31st, 2053. Man, that sounds like a long time. We will also contribute up to $3.75 million, which is equal to 3 months of our CROC revenue, into a revenue stabilization fund. That money will be available in case there are any hiccups in receiving the money from DMV. We also will fund a debt service reserve out of the proceeds of the bond issuance. Our current plan, but of course, this may be subject to change, depending on what's happening in the market. Our current plan is to issue the bonds with level debt service of approximately $7.5 million a year across the entire term, the 30-year term of the debt. Based on the market conditions as of approximately 2 weeks ago, if we had done the transaction at those rates, this would have resulted in a par amount of approximately $116 million, true interest cost of 3.99%, and net proceeds that would be available to transfer to VPRA, approximately $122 million. Of course, all of these figures are based on what the market was doing 2 weeks ago. We expect it will change between now and the time that we actually go to market. I want to focus for a moment on some really good news. If you recall that earlier in the process, Joanne and her team did an assessment of the credit rating that we would expect to receive on the bonds. This assessment was done based on sort of the known criteria that the leading credit ratings agencies use, and they look at, what is the strength and the stability of the pledged revenues, what is the general credit quality of the Commonwealth, what is the economic strength of Northern Virginia, and just in general, what is the overall structure of the proposed bonds. And based on that preliminary look, we were expecting an investment grade credit rating in the AA range. So during the week of May 9th, earlier this month, public ratings for the bonds were released by both Moody's and S&P. S&P has rated the bonds as a AA, as expected, and Moody's has rated the bonds as a AA1, which is actually one notch better than we expected, which had been AA2. I think this is a very positive outcome and it reflects very positively on the overall credit quality of the transaction that we're looking to do. Then beyond that, the bonds have also received an independent green bond designation. So investors are increasingly interested in having bonds in their portfolios that are supporting environmentally sustainable projects. We engage with Kestrel Verifiers, which is one of the leading companies in this area. And we demonstrated to them, just like Rich was talking about, how the whole TRV program and the additional rail that it will support ultimately is going to reduce emissions, particulates, and improve safety. They agreed with that, and Kestrel has certified that our bonds conform to the green bond principles. And we believe that this designation is going to make the bonds more marketable and help to draw in more investors. I will not go through each bond document in detail. I do want to draw your attention to 3 items in particular, and then of course we can answer more questions when we get to the end. So first, the POS, or the preliminary official statement. The POS is an informational disclosure that's used by the underwriters to market the bonds to potential investors. The POS includes a bond counsel opinion by McGuire Woods. In addition to giving information on things like the tax exempt status of the debt, it speaks to the liabilities that are associated with the bonds. And it states that the Series 2022 bonds are not a debt of the Commonwealth or of any political subdivision, including the VPRA and including all the local jurisdiction members of NBTC and PRTC. Our counsel, Steve Isaac, has also provided a memo, which hopefully you all were able to read, on this topic. I know that this has been very important through all the discussions that we've had about this transaction. From the outset, we have committed to structuring the bonds with no liability for the jurisdictions, and in these documents are the confirmation that we have done that. So number 2 is the continuing disclosure agreement. This agreement requires the commissions to file information each year in accordance with rules that the SEC has. This will include things like VREs, audited financial statements, and data on the annual collection of the regional tax revenues. I note this not because it's a particularly heavy lift. I think the disclosure will be relatively easy, but because this is one of the responsibilities that is going to outlive all of us who are here in the room today. And last is the assignment and payment. So like the continuing disclosure agreement, this is a document that will be executed by both of the commissions, not just by NBTC as the issuer. This agreement is going to replace the original agreement that we had executed back in 2018 between the 2 commissions back when we were just getting going with the CROC. So this agreement formalizes all of the arrangements that are necessary to fulfill the responsibilities that we have within the funding agreement. NBTC is going to continue to serve as the recipient of all of the revenues on behalf of both of the commissions. However, NBTC will be requesting that the comptroller send all of the revenues directly to the bond trustee. That we've created that in order to give confidence to the investors. The commissions are also going to be obligated each year to seek those necessary appropriations or allocations to ensure that the funds will be available to then deposit into the CROC fund. So I will close with the next steps, and then the team and I will be happy to take your questions. All of these next steps, of course, are contingent on a recommendation from this board. So NBTC will take up their authorizing resolution for the bonds on June the 2nd, and PRTC will take up their resolution on June the 9th. Since NBTC is the issuer of the bonds, the POS and the other marketing material can be posted publicly immediately following the NBTC approval. So we anticipate posting that information on June the 3rd. All the POS and all of that marketing material will be clearly marked as still being subject to the PRTC approval. This approach will allow us to maintain our planned schedule with pricing targeted for mid-June and the closing of the transaction, by the end of June. Of course, the specific dates that we hit may vary depending on the market conditions. And I would like to add one more step to this list, which isn't listed here. Based on B of A's recommendation, we intend to put out a voluntary notice to the investor community early next week that the issuance is expected to be forthcoming. That will allow the B of A team to begin having general conversations with investors. And we believe that this early engagement will help to create some anticipation for the bond sale. I'm sure Matt could speak a little more to this if you'd like, but they really feel that with this being a new credit, with the strong ratings and with the green designation, that there really could be a lot of interest by investors. And so we want to create that awareness as early as we can. And so with that, Madam Chair, I would be happy to take your questions.
Any questions for Mr. Dalton or Mr. Schofield?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We have, through all the votes and the project, it's a good project. We need to move forward. We made a commitment. We need to do this. But I think it is imperative to at least express any concerns we have moving forward in some of this. First off, I'd like to point out, I'll only be 94 when this is done. I might not be out of here. I know there's younger people here than me, so don't write us off that quickly. Anyway. In the city of Fredericksburg, years ago, we all had IDAs or EDAs now, what we call them, issuing bonds, and we all go ahead and sign off on agreements to back up those bonds. And our bond counsel comes and says, oh, don't worry about it. It's an obligation to you. If they go up, they go belly up. And then they say, but if they go belly up, it does have a tendency to set a reputation and you might not want to let that happen. So while there's no legal obligation, there have been, at least at our level, have been told, yeah, but you really don't want that happening. You might want to consider stepping in. Part of this for me is also, we have a C-Rock fund, we get 15 million off the top of a funding source that is going to be going down and continue to go down. And frankly, for some of the smaller jurisdictions, that's going to be an issue for us going down the road. And we're selling bonds on a declining revenue. Again, they're buying bonds, they understand that and everything else like that. I fully understand it. But since I've been on this board and other transportation boards, the question has always been to the state, guys, you know that the current funding sources for transportation aren't going to work. When are we going to change? Oh, we're working on it. Well, as far as I can tell you, they've been working on it for at least a decade and a half. I've had 2 meetings now with new Secretary of Transportation, and we're still working on it. And I think we all realize we're moving away from fossil fuel. We all want to do that. Everybody's happy about us doing this with trains. So we are looking at a funding source that is going to continue to drop for 30 years. I don't know how much longer it's going to be. And again, as it happens, that 15 million still has to come off the top to make our commitment. And for some of us jurisdictions, that's going to be a bit of an issue. It's not going to happen on my watch, but at some point, the lines are going to cross when you're looking at 30 years. I just want, the question would be from the bond councils, again, there is no legal obligation if this goes south at some point. But there is, as we've been told in the past, I'll call it a moral obligation not to allow something like this to happen. And there is a push to intervene at that point. Are we saying now that that is not ever going to be the case, that we're not going to find ourselves in a position? Because you mentioned earlier on when they looked at setting the bond ratings, they looked at NBTC and the jurisdictions. And so they're looking beyond just that $15 million to make that bond rating. So my question is, this, what's the legal obligation versus what frankly would be again called a moral obligation?
Good question. In this structure, there's not a moral obligation. I think that by analogy, the transactions that you've been describing sound to me like somewhat different transactions where a locality actually makes a subject to annual appropriation commitment, and that's a moral obligation. That's not this structure. This is a pure revenue-based bond. So the recourse is only to those revenues. There's no subject to appropriation backstop. So I think this is qualitatively better than the structures that you described. You know, there's always intangible reputational concerns, and I think that probably is more where you were headed with your comment, and I can't disagree with that. But this is not a general obligation, and it's not a moral obligation in the sense that we sometimes see in public finance transactions. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm curious since, and I apologize if this is, covered in one of the many documents, but since we're only committed on the debt service side, I'm just curious, over the 30 years, is there a lockout period before which we could pay down the obligations such to reduce our debt service, since the 30 years moving forward is so unknown? Is there what flexibility is there over the 30-year period to pay down, to reduce our debt service obligation?
Sure, that's a very good question, Joey.
Yes.
Taking that?
Sure. Yeah, so the bonds will be outstanding for 30 years. However, after 10 years, we'll have the opportunity, and that will be at the option of NVTC, to call the bonds early, or to refinance the bonds if interest rates are lower. So yes, absolutely. If other funding becomes available, there is an opportunity that the bonds could be refinanced or redeemed early, should funds make themselves available.
Okay, I appreciate that. Apologies if this was covered earlier.
Any other questions for Mr. Schofield? Any other highlights to make with regards to?
I just want to say thank you to the VRE and commissions for this great relationship we have that we're continuing. Thank you, Rick, for mentioning that back in 2019, CSX wanted to raise your rates about $5-6 million. Put a stop to that until we got the deal done. Took a little time to get the deal done, but especially with real estate prices going up, that could have been even higher. So we're glad we purchased the property, and we did. Again, just thank you for moving us forward. We have a lot of great projects that we're going to continue. We want to point out, Transforming Rail Virginia, we have phase 1 and phase 2. There's actually phase 3 and phase 4. You get separation. You mentioned separation of passenger and freight, and that's not all funded. Every dollar we get, if we get more federal funds, it's going to be plowed into phase 3 and phase 4 and getting that separation, and actually eventually building a 4-track corridor from Spotsylvania all the way into Washington, D.C. There's only 2 tracks pretty much from Spotsylvania to Franconia. And then 3 tracks from Franconia to Alexandria, and then just 3 tracks in, it'll be 4 tracks all the way through. So it'll be a game changer, and we're trying to expedite it with some federal IIJ funds, but this is a critical piece, so thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to thank Mark and his team. It's probably too early to pop the champagne on this, but he's done an incredible job at NVTC a few months ago. I compared him to Mick Jagger because he performs this concert time after time after time, meeting after meeting after meeting, and does a great job every time. So thank you, Mark, and the entire team for your work on this. I know it's a heavy lift, very heavy lift.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I also want to thank Mark and the staff and the whole team for moving this forward. And Mr. Kelly's comments, I appreciate that. I think your comments are a good reminder to all of us in our roles outside of this body, but also frankly the state, that it's important for our tax system to remain relevant to the economy, to technology that's being used, at the time. So let's all keep in mind that over the next few decades, we have to update our tax system for climate change. So doesn't mean necessarily more taxes or less, but it's got to be relevant to the economy. So thank you.
Is there a motion?
Second.
Moved by Mr. Walkinshaw, seconded by Ms. Bagley. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you, Mr. Schofield. We will now move into item 9D, authorization to issue a GPC task order for phase 1 of the System Plan 2050 update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Operations Board is asked to authorize the CEO to issue a GPC task order to STV Incorporated for phase 1 of the system plan update in the amount of $354,263 plus a contingency for a total amount not to exceed $389,689. So just quickly in summary, this task order will initiate the first phase of an updated system, or the first phase of a 3-phase process to update our existing system plan. As you recall, we came in last fall, gave a presentation and had a really good discussion with the ops board on the current system plan 2040 and received your feedback, not just at that meeting, but subsequently at other meetings and other conversations. So we now want to pull all that together, formalize that, and by use of our GPC consultant, basically go out, initiate that first phase. Like I said, this is very data-driven, very outreach-driven, and very data-driven. And so with the ultimate goal that we would come up with basically updated ridership forecasts throughout the period up to and extended to 2050. We will be, of course, continuing to engage the operations board, all of our jurisdictional partners as we go through this process. So this is really taking what we've done in the most recent months and now really putting the meat to the bone, if you will, from a data, from an analysis, and from an outreach standpoint. So that's my summary, Madam Chair.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Alcorn, seconded by Mr. Kelly. Any discussion?
Madam Chair, yeah, Rich, just a question about the scope. Is this activity limited just to where our existing service exists? Or in other words, is the data going to look as well as job trends, housing locations, basically, we're looking at the 2050. Would that be within scope of this effort, or?
The short answer is absolutely. We will be, try not to use too technical terms, but we'll be expanding those catchment areas, looking beyond our existing service area, looking not just from a geographical standpoint, but to your point, really drilling down and seeing what those, it's really, the data, the analysis really drives into the ridership demand, right? What is the demand? And there's, as you know, there's several elements. And frankly, we're encountering new pieces to what that, or new elements of that data that can inform us, I think, even better, actually, moving forward. So the short answer is absolutely.
And just to follow up on that, I thank you, Rich, for that clarification, because, this is the one body that's actively working across the commissions, and we have a lot going on in different parts of our respective commissions. And we have, in the long run, where we have more transit needs that are going to need to be serviced across, especially some of our north-south corridors that don't have connections right now. So I think looking at the data, looking at those projections, and again, we're talking about a railroad here, but on the other hand, this does provide, I think, an opportunity to look at the need that could be helpful in planning for the long term. So thank you.
Mr. Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I want to build on Mr. Alcorn's comment, looking at not only we've now talked about after coming through COVID, that we're gonna be looking beyond just a commuter service. That we're looking at reverse commutes, we're looking at weekend and other opportunities that are out there within the region. I'm assuming that, because when we're just saying when I hear updating, I'm looking at, we're a commuter train service, we're just updating based on this. I think we're talking about expanding beyond just commuter service. I'm assuming that this will
Yes, sir.
address that.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yeah, I'll just.
That's fine.
Do we have any concerns about the timing of undertaking this project, given the current uncertainty of our ridership? It's up, I mean, the presentation is obviously we're headed in the right direction. I'm just curious, like the timing of when this is happening to project 26, 30, while we're in such a challenging time to do projections. How are we gonna account for that?
That's a great question. Let me just back up. We were headed into updating the system plan right before COVID started, okay? So we paused. But what we wanted to do, and that's some of that information we shared with you before. And we validated, there is now, mobility movement in the region. And that was that streetlight data that we shared with you before. So frankly, we could not have done it any sooner. This is the time to start opening that up and start collecting more data, doing more analysis. And to some degree, this ends up being, it's not static. We'll open this up. We're gonna have some questions left unanswered. And we will continue to, work on that as time goes on. But this, actually, from my professional opinion, this time is perfect to start opening this up. And also not just necessarily answering the 2026 questions, we need some answers to what is a preferred reverse commute patterns. Because we do have it in our TRV agreements that we could start operating weekend service in 2026. So we need to be informed on what those service plans can look like. And so we need, it's best to have that data so we can inform ourselves on, as we add additional service, where do we need to put that? And then in conjunction with that, if we are going to expand our geographical area, if there's some indication that makes sense, we need to start working on that sooner rather than later. So that's my long way of saying, I believe the timing is perfect, actually, to move forward.
And just on that point, Rich, how long will phase one of this work take? Right, I presume it will be taking place over the course of the next year. So they're not gonna come back to us 2 weeks from now with this work, so they'll have updated ridership data throughout the task order.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's what our plan is, to, as data becomes available that we can share with you, because we don't want to come in at the end of the 6 or 9 month period here, just dump it all on. We want to give you updates, and that'll actually help us, I believe, help inform us in the very near term, what we're doing within the next couple of years. So that's how we're trying to marry this up. This will be very, very active, very dynamic. This isn't the last time you're going to hear about it this year.
Any other questions or discussion? Mr. Stewart?
How does this align with the 2040 system plan and the actual plans that previous? Question two is, more importantly, how is it aligned with how we performed in relation to previous iterations of this that were done 20 or 30 years ago? I mean, excluding the pandemic impact.
Sure. So that may be where the vernacular for update comes from. So we're not starting with a clean sheet of paper. We do have a system plan 2040. But for example, the system plan 2040, or compare this effort with the system plan 2040, particularly with demand forecasting and stuff. This will be a more intense effort in demand forecasting than we did in 2040. And not that we were lax in what we did back in 2014, but the need is there. The need is to do a more intense demand forecasting. In terms of a scorecard, that might be something worthwhile coming back in parallel to this effort. We can come back to you and show you, because our current system plan 2040 lays out several things by phase, right? Or several objectives by phase. That actually is a good idea, you know, to come back in parallel to this and just somewhat of a scorecard and show you what we've been able to accomplish, even with the ridership, with the little footnote about the pandemics. I like that idea. That's
I would, newer member, I'm still trying to figure out how the different plans come together. And when I saw it, when I first read it, I'm looking at it now, the 2040 stuff that I got. Looking at this in 2050, I'm trying to understand the additional value that this would bring to what we already have. And then in turn, my question goes, okay, how have we done so far with what we have? So something along those lines that would give us some sense of that.
That'd be great.
There's nothing else. All in favor? Any opposed?
Aye.
We'll now move into item 9E, authorization to issue a GEC 8 task order for engineering support for the Franconia Springfield Station Improvements Project.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're seeking authorization to issue a GEC 8 task order, HDR Engineering, for amounts stated in the resolution plus a contingency for a total amount not to exceed $1,067,000. So with this project currently, in fact, the last minute change here, I thought I put a diagram up here. So we have been working on this has been part of the current system plan. We have been working on a design to enhance the Franconia Springfield Station for orientation purposes. Let's see, this doesn't have a pointer, but this white area here is the existing Metro Rail station. And then this little white area here, including the white area here, is the existing platform. So, so part of our work to date has been to design in, and the yellow here has been to design in extended platforms on the west end and do some platform work here on the east end of this project. Subsequent to us initiating this design effort, of course, Transforming Rail in Virginia came along, and then we brought the teams together, as we have been now for the last couple of years, and integrating, you know, our station projects into what the rail infrastructure projects would be, up to and including in this area, a third track, and then eventually a fourth track. So I do want to point out what we're seeking here is a couple of things. We'll take the current design, which is the yellow, and what we'll also do is we will incorporate what is now this area here. We're going to incorporate some additional design work because, again, in collaboration with the rail authority, this third track's going to come sooner rather than later now. So let's go ahead and go out. What this orange area is, it's a combination of a pathway and underground pedestrian access to allow riders, passengers to go underneath what would be the future third and fourth track. So the third track is this blue line. The blue line. The proposed third track is there, and then of course the fourth track is somewhere in here as well. One thing I do want to point out on this project, one of the basic objectives of this project is to maintain a flow from this neighborhood over here east of the tracks. There's a very large neighborhood there that walk and bike and obviously utilize, if not the VRE station directly for VRE trains, but to get to Metro Rail there. So we want to maintain that that continuity. Of course, we want to do it in the safest way possible. So I just thought maybe a little visual here, albeit it is more in engineering speak here. But this task order also then basically pull all this together. There'll be, we'll pull the entire procurement package together in order to go out and solicit for construction. That's my summary, Madam Chair.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Banks. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Kelly. Any discussion? Yes, sir.
Sorry for talking too much this morning. Just want to thank the VRE team for working with us. I know Christine done some calls, Dallas as well, coordinating this with what we're doing with CSX as well. And that pedestrian underpass is so important to maintain that service, to make sure that people can walk and bike. That's very important to us. Me personally, to us in the Commonwealth. So thank Rich and his team for working with us, and look forward to continued progress.
All in favor? Any opposed?
Aye.
We will now move into item 9F, authorization to amend contracts for the delivery of diesel fuel for VRE locomotives. Mr. Dalton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The recommendation is in front of you. Let me just sum it up this way. This is actually the second, one of those second part in a two-part process. As it relates to our diesel fuel contracts, we did come to you in December as part of our amended FY22 budget and increase that line item in our budget, recognizing that the volatility and more specifically the upward increase in diesel fuel prices. And so, and that amended budget was adopted. And so we are now coming around and amending the actual contracts to increase the total contract value. But what we're doing here is we need to do the current contract, in other words, the FY 2022 contracts, because the amended amount that we had requested at the December meeting, we're going to consume that and probably a little bit into our contingency as identified in the board item. So it's no secret, I believe, this room, fuel prices have just been increasing. And even though we do look out forward, or we have some forward looking in terms of fuel prices, we use a consultant, we have some fixed price contracts. But to give you an example, we had fixed price contracts for the month of, I get this wrong, Mark, help me out, February and March, or March and April. And so 58% of the fuel we consume, and we consume about 145,000 gallons a month, 58% of that fuel was at $2.77 a gallon. And then the other 42%, floats to the market. We locked into a fixed price contract for the month of May, but the price per gallon had increased $1, right? So very volatile. So my point here is that by amending these contracts, as recommended here, we will be able to essentially pay our fuel bill for month of May and month of June. We do have the contracts in place for FY 2023, and of course we anticipated some additional fuel costs, fuel pricing in there, and if we have to come back and amend those mid-year or even at the end of the year, we'll deal with that at that point. But that's essentially what we're doing here. That's my summary, Madam Chair.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Banks. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Kelly. Any questions or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We will now move into item 9G, authorization to provide a letter of support to the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority for a United States Department of Transportation Multimodal project discretionary grant opportunity for design and construction of the Long Bridge Capacity Expansion Project. Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you. As I mentioned last meeting, we are trying to set new records for the length of agenda item titles here. And so we do have a couple here that are in competition. This is simple. It's the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority as part of their funding plan for multiple projects, but specifically the Long Bridge Capacity Expansion Project. They're seeking the opportunity to get funding from multiple sources. So the recommendation here is to support that effort by a letter of support from the operations board.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Kelly, seconded by Ms. Hayes. Any discussion? Mr. Alcorn?
I was gonna say, Mr. Dalton, as long as you don't try to create an acronym out of that title.
Very talented staff. I'm sure they can.
Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? We'll now move into item 9H, authorization to provide a letter of support for Spotsylvania County's FY 22 raise grant application for the I-95 exit 126 US Route 1 revitalization project. I'm sorry, Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This, for folks that were on the operations board last year, you saw this project on a recommendation, or you provided a letter of support for the same project last year. Not much has changed here. Once again, this is for the FY 2022 raise grant application. The point I want to make here too, this particular project, in addition to some infrastructure improvements there, also is contemplating a feeder bus from the future VA hospital in that area. If you're familiar with that, right to the VRE Fredericksburg Station, both for VRE and Amtrak passengers. So that's my summary, Madam Chair.
Is there motions?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Hayes, seconded by Mr. Kelly. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We'll now to item 10, information items in our spending authority report, Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to have two items up here. Glad to answer any questions. I will point out, though, that we finally got the resources and stuff together, execute a task order to get the platform station lights upgraded at both Manassas Park and the Burke Center Station. You should see it out there at the Manassas Park Station now, not soon at the Burke Center Station. So that's part of our program to upgrade all of our lighting to LED. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any questions for Mr. Dalton? And it's my understanding there is no closed session. And so we will move into operation board members' time. If you would like to make some comments, feel free. If not, you can pass. So we will kind of start on the end here, sir.
Pass.
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 The only thing I thought of, when you were talking about the Spotsylvania MVA connection, when we did our tour that day, the gentleman we met at Union Station was connecting from the VA. So it's just kind of fascinating to see that come full
I
circle.
remember that conversation well.
Yeah. So he was there and he regaled us with his lengthy multimodal effort to get, back and forth to the VA that day. And he was on VRE. So I'm just excited that we're going to be a part of facilitating, that process.
Pass.
Pass. I did want to take a moment to say we are also up to date on our commercial driver's license certifications. I join us at our next review of those documents on July 20th. I went ahead and looked it up.
That concludes board member remarks. I'll remind everyone that our next board meeting will be held on June 17th, and a reminder that the Finance Committee will meet after that meeting, and after this meeting, the Bylaws Committee will meet. So, anything else, Mr. Dalton?
I want to ask Ms. Garvey or Ms. Baum.
Yes. To our friends who are remotely, Ms. Garvey and Ms. Bomke, any comments?
Chair, I guess I'll be super, because everybody's just leaving. As some of you know, I'm in Europe for 3 weeks, one of them quarantined for COVID, but I've ridden some trains here, and it just has made me more inspired to make sure we do all we can do to support VRE and get some better train lines in our own country, and our own state. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Garvey, Ms. Bomke?
Get disconnected.
Okay. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn? Any opposed? Okay. See you next month. Thank you.
We'll convene the bylaws committee about 10 minutes. We have a short agenda.
It's a weekend.
Gentlemen, service, good to go.
All right, I will call the bylaws meeting to order. Just to be thinking about if anyone wants to be chair of the bylaws committee, please be thinking about that. But I am going to turn it over to Joe, to kind of jump right into it.
I apologize. I had a nagging feeling I forgot to print something off and I just realized it was minutes from the last meeting. I sent them out to you last Friday, but I didn't send out a printed copy today. But going over them really quickly, my takeaway was that an actual change to the bylaws was probably not something we wanted to recommend at this point. And that it was the better path would be to have the board every year, as they're voting on members of the executive committee, take into consideration things like, does the executive committee look like the ridership looks like? Is it all of the geographic locations? Are they represent that type of consideration, including adding an additional, at least one additional member, which is allowed by the bylaws? If I didn't get that right, please let me know.
That is, to my knowledge, what we kind of all agreed on.
And then there was, you guys asked for some information, so that's what I put together here. So there's the executive committee representation, and then the ridership over the last approximately 20 years. So I did a chart. So, it doesn't match up exactly. You're not seeing the representation being exactly matching up to the ridership, but it's not that far off. You do know, Joe made the comment earlier that looking at the ridership, the percentages really haven't changed that much over the past 20 years. They tend to stay the same. So these averages are pretty indicative of what they've been the entire. I think other than that, I'll open it up for further discussion.
Welcome, Joe.
I mean, I was just gonna say, I mean, based on, I think, kind of the consensus we had coming out of our last meeting, maybe it's appropriate now for the chair to consider either reconvening the nominating committee to add would it be the fifth?
In this particular case, it would be the fifth.
In this case, a fifth member of the executive committee. I mean, I think we probably need to at least announce to the full operations board that, that's gonna happen. So folks who are interested can put their names forward. I don't know, my comments last time volunteered Mr. Kelly to be the member, but he might not be willing, but I think obviously we have a feel for where that membership is from. I was hoping Ms. Baumke's not here, but I think she chaired the nominating committee, or I chaired. You chair, oh, okay, got it. Okay. All right.
And two things, to be fair, and it was pointed out that the southern jurisdictions in some cases have not been coming in, putting forward. So this was brought up at our last FAMPO board meeting, and I think FAMPO realizes how important VRE is to our region. Reflecting on these numbers, we look at the next 20 years, I think we all realize where this is going. The southern jurisdictions are right now, we're still the fastest growing region in the Commonwealth. We're going to become more and more the ridership. In fact, right now, Stafford spots here 3 and 4, with Prince William and Fairfax being 1 and 2. And to Steve's point last time, PRTC was initially set up to be the counterpart to MBTC in running a train operation. It just morphed into something else. Because I don't think anybody in Prince William County has much of an idea of what we're talking about in our jurisdictions to the south on transportation. And because of our position, which is a little bit different than our northern compatriots, we do have a little bit of differences on what our goals are in transportation. And I think that is very important to reflect in all aspects of the operations, from policy board to the executive committee. And yes, the executive committee, and we've had this conversation, we went through this changeover in PRTC years and years and years ago and stuff like that. And everybody goes, well, we all work so well together and everything's great. Well, I've actually seen it where it's really not worked well together. And I'll defer to Steve and Ms. Dalton too on this. Where the executive committee kind of becomes important is when we hit crisis mode. And then all of a sudden, it's the executive committee that's giving direction. And I think it's imperative in those situations that understanding that we have a little bit of a different view on the world than from principally north, that needs to be reflected in those types of situations. And I appreciate the fact that we would be willing to go back and look at that. Again, it's a philosophical thing for me. It may change. I'm not going to be here much longer anyway, but I think, Stafford and Spotsylvania are going to end up being the big boys in the room as this continues on, and therefore, to reflect the concept of, the executive board should basically reflect the policy committee in respect to interests. And again, there's an Northern Virginia interest, and I think we're all realizing that our interests don't necessarily totally align on everything to the south, and we need to have that voice in the room. And that executive committee should also reflect majority of the ridership. Because again, there will be times when it hits the fan, and it's the executive committee that's going to be setting the tone, moving forward. And every interest needs to be in that room for VRE when that happens.
So, sounds like, oh, yes, is that Ms. Garvey?
It's Ms. Garvey, sorry.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, and I hope I'm following this correctly. So is there I think we're deciding not to amend the bylaws, which is great, to suggest that if there's an imbalance, another member be added. That's fine to me. Who decide? And I think my question for the group is what triggers that there's going to be another person added? Is there some sort of a trigger mechanism, or somebody decides it's not off balance? And I also am understanding that even balance may not be there at the moment. There's no one from the south that wishes to serve, so that kind of puts us in an awkward position. So that's just my question: how do we trigger that, or do we wait for a crisis? And I'm sorry if the question's been answered.
Yeah, I think we're just making that decision that we want to add a fifth slot to provide balance and fairness. And I think it is true that perhaps in the past, as recently as maybe even last month, that there may not have been a strong interest, but I think if we add that fifth spot, we would probably have some people in mind that we could ask to serve in that capacity.
Okay, so then when it's up to the nominating committee to make sure that there's somebody from each sort of geographic area, that's sort of their job, to present a slate is geographically balanced. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think that would be appropriate.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Sorry.
I was going to mention one thing to think about, and it kind of goes to what Ms. Garvey is saying, and that is, if we're not going to amend the bylaws, and I completely understand why you don't want to do that, but what is the direction to the nominating committee, and what is the goal that is trying to be served? And most importantly, I think, how do you sort of codify that so that becomes the consistent practice over time? Because, I think right now we know what you're trying to accomplish because we're all talking about it. But 2-3 years from now, as membership changes and whatnot, there needs to be some way to kind of memorialize what the goal of these subordinate officers are.
Could we draft or have drafted some basic, we'll call them guidelines, that are approved by the board, and say these guidelines will be presented to the committee, nominating committee, and then we'll make nominations based on these guidelines?
That's what I would suggest, yes.
Yeah, and I would say to that, especially if we're not going to amend the bylaws, really that's the only option we have to provide some direction, other than just giving each year the nominating committee the ability to kind of make that decision on their own each year. I mean, if we're not going to amend the bylaws, we don't have a lot of options outside of some guidelines. Mr. Walkinshaw.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if we're gonna memorialize it that way, my recommendation would be that the language is broad. You know, I think at MBTC, we would, whether it's in the bylaws or memorializing guidelines, we'd be uncomfortable if it was like PRTC +1. But I think you can imagine situations where we need a different other elements of balance on the executive committee. Could be gender, we could be in a situation where we have, for whatever reason, 4 men on the executive committee, and maybe we don't want that or uncomfortable with that. Right now, we also have the situation where there's a chairman emeritus role on the executive committee, which obviously is unfilled right now because of turnover. So I think there are a lot of different iterations that could happen. So memorializing that there's a subordinate or potentially more than one subordinate role that can help accomplish whatever balance is necessary at that time.
But I think you read it that way. You just basically say you want to make sure that there's an understanding that there's the different interests will be represented on the board, and then leaves it open to be, because if somebody obviously comes from Stafford County and I'm going to be secretary and stuff like that, then that takes care of that, and then maybe Vanessa Spark slides in if we want to add another seat.
So it can be situational based on the needs of the year.
I just think it's important that we have that the executive committee represents, one, majority of the ridership, two, that it represents the interests of the member jurisdictions on the board, and then you don't have to mention anything beyond that. Is that, Steve?
Well, if I may say, and I think that's all great, and I think making it broad to provide that flexibility is good. Just want to underscore that, if we're not amending the bylaws, then it's really not going to be set in stone, so to speak. And maybe that really is the goal, for it not to be set in stone, and so that, each year people could look at those guidelines and see if they want to make changes. But just want to make the key point that really the way to codify it would be through the bylaws. And I'm not suggesting that we do that. I'm just, let's put effort into making sure that the guidelines make sense and that it provides the flexibility, but with the understanding that at the end of the day, it's just going to be guidelines, right?
Well,
Question?
I do understand right now, we've got a lot on our plate. And having been involved in changing master agreements and bylaws in the past, it usually gets kind of interesting. And I don't think we need that added to the mix of all the other things we're facing. I have enough faith in my fellow elected officials on this board that at least for the foreseeable future, this will work. It might come to a point later on, but until we get through a lot of other things that we're facing right now, I don't want to make this the be all and end all.
Right. And you've been here a lot longer, and so I'm trusting you in that, because you have a lot more experience than I do. I really just want to kind of prevent us from having this discussion next year and the year after.
I think the guidelines is the first good step. And then just when the nominating committee gets, here is the general guideline. And it can, if we pass it by the board and say, these will be the guidelines, the future of making appointments to the executive committee, I think that gives it a little bit more of.
Sets the tone for expectations.
To it, as opposed to just something.
Then it will be in the minutes of the meeting and.
Well, let me, it's,
Question, Chair?
Harvey.
Yeah, one more thing. I think if I'm understanding correctly, then it's up to the nominating committee, which is great. And I like this going with guidelines to the nominating committee. And then if there's an there's always the possibility, right, that the nominating committee is a slate and somebody objects, right? And then it goes to a vote of the group. Maybe there's a concern that, some people might out, some regions or places might be outnumbered. But is that it seems to me sort of a safeguard that it doesn't happen, that the group can say, wait, don't agree with this slate, need to add somebody or whatever. Is that right?
Well, been in politics a long time, understand everything in politics. The last thing is to understand that there's any continuity in anything. But no, I think and it still presents a speed bump to your point. If there's an issue or a question, then the nominating committee is gonna have to say, we're not following the guidelines because, and then make whatever case they want to make. And then it's still ultimately up, as in any vote, it's always up to the policy board to make the final decision.
Yeah, so that, I think that works, I hope.
Well, there's.
Even, it even sets aside a chance that, if we don't all agree, it's not, if it's a whole different group of people that are not agreeing, well, there's still some ways to work it out with a vote.
The only one other thing, and it's frankly not a biggie to me, but the tradition has been, I don't know if it's codified in the bylaws or not, that the tradition has always been, it's just a matter of, okay, secretary moves up to vice, and it's just a rotation of the officers is the usual standard procedure. So is this new position going to be in the rotation?
Well, technically, I'm not in the rotation.
That is not in the bylaws.
It's not in the bylaws. I would just say that's more of a traditional thing that we kind of.
That's kind of my point.
Well, I think what happened, part of it was, I think some changes happened on the,
Right.
created some holes in the process.
Yeah. And actually, I want to get to Mr. Alstrom, I'm sorry.
Well, I, actually, go ahead. I just have a timing question.
Yeah, I mean, I was just, from my perspective, Matt, I would say yes. I mean, that person should work their way into the rotation, but obviously that's a tradition that.
We just had this huge turnover. It's been amazing to me. I have never seen, in the turnover in a board like at the here, and frankly, PRTC is the same way. I mean, it has just been in the course of actually only 2 years, it's been almost a total change on the boards.
Sure, just a quick question on timing. So we're talking about the guidance would be established, provided to the nominating committee, and then we would go back and then nominate the proposed fifth member. Is that correct?
I think so, and I'm assuming staff can maybe help draft some guidelines, and then we can maybe look and tweak if necessary.
We can get it to you, take a look at it. Yep, and I assume you're okay with the nominating committee actually coming back with more than one additional officer. Because we haven't talked about that, do you only want it to limit to just one? Or, like, for instance, in this case, we don't have a past chair, so you have one less than you normally would anyway. So maybe they would recommend 2, but, and of course, maybe you don't want them to come back and recommend 5, that would become.
Well, because next year we will have a past chair, and so I don't know if we just leave that.
That's good to hear.
God willing, we'll see.
You could be governor by then.
Oh, who knows? But so I'm not sure if we want to fill that, or unless you're saying fill it for this year.
No, I'm saying in the guidance, is the guidance that they may consider one additional member or just additional members?
For this year, though.
Well,
I just don't know if the guideline to say additional members. I mean, I'd leave it as broad as you can.
Yeah, I would say leave it as broad and
Yeah.
and
Because
the
this,
chair-
like I said, next year, I don't think
it
the
shouldn't be a
immediate
problem.
past chair will be an issue, but.
Right.
And so timing, just to be clear, you guys will work on some language for the
We'll
guidelines.
get you something next week,
Yeah.
and you can at least look at it and see what you think.
And you come back to the bylaws committee, right? And then be the nominating.
In June.
Yeah, come back to the bylaws committee and and then I guess you bring it to the the ops board is gonna have to, when would you appoint the nominating committee? That's the question. You're gonna vet these guidelines with the full ops board, I assume. And at that point, you'd appoint the nominating committee to go back and take a look at the executive committee with these guidelines in mind.
I think we see what we can get done in June in terms of appointing the nominating committee, maybe looking at those guidelines as well, and then having them go and do their duty, and then July, by the time maybe we'll be willing to, I guess, vote on.
New slate. for
Right.
additional
Yeah, we got a new
members.
slate coming up anyway, though.
Yeah, we're kind of.
Anyway.
But then we're gonna come back in September, October and start looking at the next slate
next
as well, so. I mean, it's gonna be somewhat perpetual here. Yeah.
Well, and maybe we just do all this in preparation of next year. In which case we will be ahead of schedule.
That's fine with me.
Okay.
Fine with me. Nobody's real super upset about it now. I think doing it for next year feels kind of
Nobody was ever super upset, just concerned.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you raising the concerns. I think that's good. And now, we're kind of ready ahead of time a little bit. Good.
Okay,
So what I'm hearing is maybe, while it's fresh, distribute some guidelines to this committee, and then do you want to meet in June, or do we want to?
Remembering that we have a finance committee.
Yes, we're gonna start, well, I don't want this to be the reason why you make bad decisions. We're just gonna start committee meeting opportunities because we're coming into budget season. It's gonna get kind of tight.
If you brought this back in August, we meet in August.
No.
That's right.
Yeah, there's that too. We don't.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Do we need another meeting?
That's,
I mean,
I think Steve's gonna be able to do.
Yeah, I mean, if we can get feedback just through email,
Yeah.
then we may not need to meet again. I mean,
I would just prefer if we could bring it back to the board before, so it's not as part of, it's just like, okay, here's an item on the board, let's give a chance, everybody to have a chance to talk about it, not cram it right up at the same time that we're making.
so maybe before, just sometime before September.
we could bring it back as an information item or something in June or July, and then just have it as an information item and talk about it, and then say we're gonna bring it back to the board in September or something like that, just to get the rest of the board engaged in it.
You give a good chance to chime in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Joe, anything else from us? Steve, Rich? Ms. Garvey, all is good?
All is good.
Okay, anybody else? Great. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Everybody stay well.
You as
too.
well, Ms. Garvey.
Yep. See you next month. Thank you.